Sorry about that, babe.
After recently getting back into the real-life Pokemon TCG from a 4+ year break, I decided that it would be a great time to finally go back and beat the Pokemon Trading Card Game on the Nintendo Game Boy Color. Now, despite being a huge Pokemon fan growing up, the games, the show, the cards, and so on, I never actually owned this game as a kid. I acquired it later on and tinkered with it throughout the years, but it wasn't until now that I decided to finally sit down and rip through it. The Pokemon Trading Card Game is a hybrid digital collectible card game with some slight RPG elements and style. It was released in North America in the year 2000 for the Nintendo Game Boy Color. Now, despite it being a Game Boy Color game, you can actually play it on the Super Game Boy, which is exactly what I did for my run on the Super Game Boy 2. The story. You start the game as the main character, in my instance Bits, who's a Pokemon card nut. One day you hear a rumor about legendary and rare Pokemon cards held by great players. You indeed must go searching far and wide, battling club masters, grandmasters, and even your weasel rival Ronald in order to obtain said legendary cards. From there you take to Dr. Mason's lab, serving essentially as this game's Professor Oak, and you are off on your journey. The story is pretty thin, but it doesn't need to be an incredibly deep narrative in order to be a good time, and thankfully the Pokemon Trading Card Game does not suffer from this aspect. Graphics. The look and feel of the Pokemon TCG will seem very familiar for Gen 1 and Gen 2 Pokemon series vets. It's almost like a light version in terms of the lab, clubs, map, and so forth, just slightly downgraded. Where the graphics shine for the Pokemon TCG are with the cards themselves. In my opinion, they are a really great adaptation of the actual real-life trading cards, and they look especially great when played on the Super Game Boy 2. At the end of the day, this is a card game, not an action game, platformer, or a traditional RPG, so things remain mostly static throughout, and what is there gets the job done. Music and sound. This is a bit tough for me because the OST for Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow are some of my most listened to OSTs throughout the course of my life, so the Pokemon TCG has to live up to some lofty expectations set by its big brothers. While it's not nearly as robust or epic, it has a lot of good things to offer. Firstly, the sound design is what you'd expect from a card game on the Game Boy Color. Nothing special, but nothing bad either. Menuing, confirmation, and attacking while in battle are adequate enough. But now for the soundtrack. Composer Ichiro Shimakura put together a pretty memorable one, all things considered. Again, this OST is nowhere near as large or as epic as Gen 1 Pokemon, but what is there has a pretty good blend of being memorable in the sense of you will most definitely be humming that battle theme to yourself after hours, atmospheric in some instances, and turns up the intensity when in bigger duels. Some tracks that I wanted to highlight are the World Map and Mason Lab. It definitely has that early game feel such as Pallet Town and Gen 1 Pokemon. The theme for the Fire, Fighting, and Science clubs, super groovy. The theme for the Water, Rock, and Psychic clubs, one of the more atmospheric tracks that the game has to offer. The normal duel theme gets a shout out for refusing to get out of my brain. And of course the Club Leader Duel and Grandmaster Duel for ratcheting up that intensity, with the Grandmaster Duel having some of that Gen 1 flavor sprinkled on it. Controls. Since this game is a digital trading card game with minimal movement, the majority of the controls has come down to menuing, and I feel that with a little bit of experience, the scheme and flow become second nature. I misclicked a few times throughout, but that's definitely a user error issue and no fault of the controls. All in all, good enough for me, and time better spent elsewhere in this review. Gameplay and fun factor. This is where the Pokemon TCG shines. Now I want to preface by saying, and this is very important, while you can get some great enjoyment out of this title going in with little to no Pokemon TCG experience, I feel that the utmost enjoyment can really only be had by those Pokemon card crazed lunatics like myself. Growing up, I didn't just collect them. I played against my friends and at local comic shops as well. Throughout the years, I continued to play with friends and have a very fond recollection of this base set Jungle Fossil and promo card era. And that's exactly the era that this game emulates, along with, of course, some Pokemon TCG Game Boy Color exclusive cards throughout, which is a nice touch. If you're an inexperienced player, at times the TCG can be a bit rough. Even if you're experienced, you could fall victim to many of the same things that could plague you in the real game. lack of proper cards, lack of draw power and draw cards, bad coin flips, and the like. But the thing that I loved most about the game is the fact that they managed to capture the feel, aura, and excitement of the Pokémon TCG, and were somehow able to cram it all into a Game Boy Color cartridge. I'm very impressed. Getting into some of the specifics, early on you're able to obtain a starter deck to get you going. Throughout your journey you're able to obtain packs of cards to aid you in creating the ultimate deck or decks, as well as some individual cards through triumphs and trades. These packs are obtained by dueling other card players throughout, as well as through computer mail from Dr. Mason periodically as you progress through the game. When it comes to deck building, this is where some inexperienced players can be overwhelmed. The game does offer some suggestions through Dr. Mason's mail as well as the auto deck machine, but if you want to be truly successful, I recommend trying to stick to a general plan, obtaining packs and hoping for good pulls. I don't want to derail this game review into an overview of the actual card game too much, so I'll keep my advice as simple as possible here. For the most part, basic Pokemon are supreme. Cards such as base set Hitmonchan, Magmar from Fossil, Electabuzz from base set, Scyther from Jungle, and so forth are amazing additions to any deck. They're basic Pokemon, most first attacks only take 1 energy, and in the instance of the aforementioned Magmar and Electabuzz, you can get many status afflictions or damage avoidance via coin flips. I also recommend not having too many different Pokemon types in your deck. Throughout my run, I tried to recreate the epic Rain Dance deck, which focuses on Blastoise, and feeding energy cards via Blastoise's Pokemon power to other water Pokemon like Fossil, Lapras, and Articuno. Obviously, I didn't get all the pulls that I wanted, so I ran a split of water/fighting and water/fire throughout, ultimately settling on a Rain Dance Light plus Magmar from Fossil combo, which carried me to victory. Another huge tip is draw power. It's very important to keep things flowing. Trainer cards such as Professor Oak and Bill are paramount. The same could be said for computer search, item finder, and so forth to search your deck and discard piles to keep things going. Nothing stops a duel in its tracks quicker than lack of draw power. And aside from that, I'll let you figure out the rest on your own. Giving a quick overview of the card game itself, I'll try to keep it very brief. Each player has a 60 card deck. The win conditions revolve around knocking out your opponent's Pokemon until all prize cards are obtained, usually 4 or 6 per duel in this game, knocking out all of your opponent's Pokemon and they have none left to battle, or making your opponent draw through all of their cards, leaving them with 0 and a game over. The gist of the actual game is as follows. You duel for cards, build and enhance your deck or decks, obtain the 8 medals from the Grass, Science, Fire, Water, Lightning, Rock, Fighting, and Psychic clubs, and ultimately gaining access to the Pokemon Dome, aka the Elite Four, to complete your journey to obtaining the legendary Pokemon cards. The Pokemon TCG is a relatively straightforward game with only a few spots of deviation. As mentioned, there are a few instances throughout to obtain cards in-game via trade or other methods. The Fighting Club offers a bit of an adventure before proceeding, and having to find hidden pupils throughout the clubs. The Challenge Hall offers an opportunity for a challenge as well as the acquisition of some promo cards. And periodically you'll have to duel your frenemy Ronald, much like you did with your rival in Gen 1. I also have to mention that the Pokemon TCG also has the link cable capabilities of Gen 1, meaning you could battle your friends, transfer cards, and deck configurations. So if you have the ability to do this, it's a pretty cool extra on top of the already fun base game. The thing that I want to hammer home here is that the Pokemon TCG does a wonderful job of recreating the card game in video game form. As long as you're a fan of the game, deck building, collecting cards, and so forth, this will surely scratch that itch. But as always, every game does have its flaws. Critiques. Most of the following to get started here are minor but critiques nonetheless. I mentioned that the graphics felt like a slight downgrade in some areas when compared to Red, Blue, Yellow. While the cards and character portraits look pretty slick, the rest of the game could have definitely used a slight glow up. There's something just off to me, and it felt like the walking portions, map, etc. could have been a bit more refined, but this certainly is not game ruining by any stretch. Touching back on the soundtrack, while I enjoyed its offerings, it certainly could have been much larger. Each club should have its own soundtrack. For example, the OST and atmosphere of the Water Club is awesome, but then it feels slightly cheapened that the same OST gets reused for the Rock and Psychic clubs. A bit of a downer. At times, navigating the duels could be a bit cumbersome. Once you have to start popping into the play area, your hand, discard pile, and so forth, it could be a little bit tricky. I find that the basic functions such as using trainers, attaching energies, attacking, retreating, and so forth are very straightforward and easy. But once you have to go, quote, deeper, the limitations of the Game Boy start coming into play a little bit. but again, not too bad. My major gripe with the game is that while in some ways it does have excellent replay value, you could battle your friends in real life, you could try out a myriad of decks and builds, try to obtain all the cards in the game itself is fairly shallow outside of the complexity of the actual TCG. I wish there were more side quest type situations. Some random examples that I thought up, perhaps a high stakes battle area where maybe you just play to one prize card. Perhaps the reward for this would be you putting up a card as well as your opponent. Adding in instances of truly random battles would be pretty cool, like having people cycle in and out of areas. I'm sure they could have stored a bunch of generic trainers and decks somewhere in the code. It also could have been cool to add in minor things such as deck boxes, sleeves, and other things like that, and then having more ways to acquire those as well. I don't know, just maybe a little bit more than what the current game has to offer. Could have been nice. In summation, Pokémon TCG on the Game Boy Color is a wonderful recreation of the game most of us know and love. If you're a fan from the initial boom of Pokémon, this entry will likely be right up your alley. It was able to capture that love I had both as a kid and as an adult. The thrill of pulling cards that you want or need, epic comebacks in battles that were seemingly dead in the water, acquiring rare promo cards, and conquering your adversaries. I had an absolute blast. Sure, the graphics could have been a bit better in some areas, the OST expanded, maybe some fine-tuning on the UI, and perhaps some more extra content, but when it comes down to it, the game does its job. It's a faithful recreation of the TCG on a freaking Game Boy cartridge. As such, I give the Pokémon TCG on the Nintendo Game Boy Color a 8.75 out of 10. If you've enjoyed this review, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you haven't already. If you want more Pokémon TCG content on the Game Boy Color, check out the pinned comment, description, or end screen below. Or if you want some real-life Pokémon TCG content, feel free to check out my other channel, Bits and Glory TCG. Take care.